A young girl stood up during a quiet town hall in Dallas and asked, "What does God mean to you?" No one expected a congresswoman to break down in front of the crowd, but that's exactly what happened. The folding chairs were uncomfortable, but nobody in that Dallas community center was squirming, not anymore. They were glued, watching, waiting. Jasmine Crockett, still in her blouse from the Capitol that morning, had been taking questions for nearly an hour. Most were typical: crime, housing, education. Her answers were steady, measured. You could tell she'd done this before. Then came the voice, soft, high-pitched, a little shaky. "Excuse me, Miss Crockett," the girl said, raising her hand from the third row. Her mother reached over, as if to help her retract the question, unsure it was appropriate. But Jasmine smiled and nodded toward her. "Go ahead, sweetheart." The girl stood, pink barrettes dangling from her braids. "Couldn't have been older than 7. Her name tag said Janelle." She took a breath. "What does God mean to you?" Silence, not awkward silence, real silence, the kind that feels like everyone's afraid to even exhale. An older man in the back adjusted his cane. Two teenagers looked up from their phones. A baby stopped fussing in the corner. Jasmine's lips parted, but nothing came out at first. She blinked slowly, as if her brain needed time to go somewhere else. "That's a good question," she finally said, but it was clear the answer wasn't ready on her tongue. She looked at Janelle again, then down at her lap. The microphone in her hand was trembling just a little. She looked up. "You know," Jasmine said softly, "most days I prepare myself to answer questions about policy, bills, votes, the hard stuff, but that might be the hardest question I've heard in years." She shifted in her seat and laughed nervously. "You really gonna do this to me in front of all these people?" The crowd chuckled lightly, easing the tension, but Jasmine's eyes didn't leave Janelle. She took a breath, deep and slow. "I'll tell you what God means to me, but to really answer that I have to tell you a little bit about who I was before I ever thought about running for office." She looked past the audience like she was staring at a memory hanging in mid-air. "I grew up in Texarkana. It's a small town on the border, and when I say we didn't have much, I mean it. No cable, no AC in the car, sometimes no car, just me, my little brother, and my mama doing her best." Someone in the front whispered, him, nodding. "My mama worked 2 jobs. She was a nurse's aide during the day, cleaned houses at night, and my grandmother, her name was Eula May. She was the one who watched us when mama was working. Every night, without fail. She'd pull us into the tiny hallway between our rooms, kneel on a creaky old pillow, and pray loud, like talking to the ceiling." Loud people in the crowd laughed quietly. I used to be embarrassed by it. You could hear her through the walls. "Lord, protect my babies, give my daughter strength, let the rent be paid this month." I didn't understand why she talked to God like he was right there in the room. She paused again, her voice dropped a little. "But now I get it, because sometimes when things were real bad, the only thing we had left was that sound." Her voice, her faith. The room was still quiet, but it didn't feel tense. It felt connected. Jasmine looked directly at Janelle. "God to me isn't just about church or rules or Bible verses. God was the reason I kept going. When we had powdered milk and a broken heater, God was the whisper that told me you're not stuck here forever." Even when I wanted to give up, her voice cracked just slightly, but she didn't stop. "So what does God mean to me?" she repeated. "He's not a distant figure. He's the memory of my grandmother's hands on my head when I was scared. He's the push that got me through college when I wanted to quit. He's the thing I argue with, cry to, thank, and sometimes question, but he's never been gone, not once." A few sniffles echoed around the room. She wiped under her eye. "I didn't mean to cry in front of y'all. I didn't expect that question." She chuckled again, but this time it was heavier. The little girl didn't say anything. She just stood there staring up at her, then slowly walked toward the stage. Jasmine opened her arms without thinking. Janelle hugged her tight, and for a few seconds politics disappeared. But what Jasmine said next wasn't just an answer, it was a doorway into a past she rarely shared. Jasmine kept one arm around little Janelle as they stood there, surrounded by quiet applause and a few discreet tears. But even as the girl returned to her seat, Jasmine wasn't done. She stayed on that thread, on that name that had slipped out of her mouth. Without hesitation, "Yulame," she said, again, as if the sound itself gave her strength. "My grandmother was the kind of woman who wore the same 3 house dresses all year long and could stretch a meal like it was magic." People chuckled. She leaned forward. "I remember once we had nothing but beans and rice for 5 days straight. I came home crying because the kids at school made fun of my clothes, said they smelled like bleach and mildew. I didn't even know what mildew was, but I knew it wasn't good." She paused. "I told my grandma I hated our house. I told her I wished I had another family." The air shifted in the room. You could feel it. She didn't get mad. She didn't raise her voice. She just sat down next to me, pulled out this photo of my mama holding me as a baby, and said, "You don't gotta like where you're at, Jasmine, but don't you ever be ashamed of who raised you." Jasmine looked out at the audience again, That stuck. I think I was maybe 8, and I remember looking at that photo and thinking, is God supposed to help us get out of this, or just sit with us while we're in it? She let the question hang for a second. Our house was barely standing some nights. Roof leaked, heat cut out in winter. But every Sunday, without fail, Eula May would put on her best hat and march us to New Mount Zion Church. Several people in the audience whispered agreement. They knew that church feeling. She didn't care that we were late half the time or that our shoes didn't match. She'd say, God ain't grading you on your shoes. He's listening to your heart. The crowd laughed again, warmer. Now someone in the back said, that's right. Jasmine nodded. I believed her until I didn't. That line landed hard. She leaned back, slightly, her voice dipping lower. I was around 11 when I stopped wanting to pray. I used to fake it. I'd mumble. I'd pretend to fall asleep early. I'd get real quiet in church and look out the window. I was angry that God let us live like that, angry that my mom never had time to come to parent night, angry that every time I got too close to feeling hopeful, something else broke down or disappeared. A quiet murmur of understanding rippled through the room, heads nodding, arms crossed tighter, but Eulalie never missed a prayer. Not once. And one night I snapped. I said, Grandma, why are you wasting your time? We keep praying, but nothing's changing. If God's real, why won't he fix any of it? Her voice tightened around that memory. She didn't say anything at first, just reached out and grabbed my hand. It was rough. Her hands always felt like sandpaper. She squeezed it and said, baby, God don't always fix things the way you want. Sometimes he just keeps you from falling all the way down. The room was dead still again. She told me, you're mad now, but one day you'll understand that every breath you take on a bad day is still a blessing. And I didn't get it then. I rolled my eyes, went to bed mad, but I never forgot the way she said it. She took a long breath, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I think that was the first time I started to see faith as more than asking and getting more than church clothes and hallelujahs. It became surviving, holding on, enduring when you have every reason not to. But something happened that same year that made her believe just maybe he was listening. The year Jasmine turned 11, everything felt heavier. The heat in Texarkana that summer was merciless, the kind that stuck to your skin like wet laundry. School had let out, but Jasmine wasn't excited. No summer trips, no ice cream trucks, just more hours helping Eula May hang laundry out back, sweeping the porch, and hoping the corner store still had 25-cent noodles. But one night, that July, changed everything. It was just past 9:30. Jasmine had been sitting on the living room floor folding old church fans for fun while Eula May rested her knees in her favorite armchair. The TV buzzed faintly with a game show rerun, but no one was really watching. The screen door was cracked to let in what little breeze the night had. Then bang, a single gunshot tore through the block. Eula May didn't move. She didn't scream. She just whispered, get down, baby. Jasmine dropped flat, heart hammering against the linoleum floor. A second shot, then yelling tires screeched down the road. Then silence. Jasmine's breath caught her ears, rang. After a minute, Eula slowly got up, walked to the door, and pushed it shut. With a quiet click, she locked the deadbolt. No panic, no drama, just motion like she'd done it before. Come here, she said, her voice still calm. Jasmine ran to her. She could feel her hands shaking as she wrapped herself around her grandmother's waist. Eula kissed the top of her head. Let's pray, she said. But Jasmine pulled back. Pray for what? She asked. That they don't come back, that next time the bullet don't hit our house. Her voice cracked high and scared. What's the point? You pray every night and bad stuff still happens. Eula May looked down at her, not angry, just tired. In a way only people who've survived too much can. Look, you think praying means nothing bad ever gonna happen? She asked, eyes narrowed just a little. Jasmine didn't answer. Baby, prayer ain't no magic wand. It's not to keep pain away. It's to remind you you're still here, even after it hits. That didn't make sense to Jasmine, not yet. But the way her grandmother said it, like it was bone-deep truth, it made her stop arguing. The next morning, they found out the boy next door, Marcus Langley, 17, had been shot in the shoulder. Wrong place, wrong time. Someone had mistaken him for someone else. Jasmine had seen him just the day before riding his bike shirtless down the block, yelling something goofy at his friends. Now he was in a hospital bed, lucky to be alive. The neighborhood was tense for weeks. Police cruisers circled more often. Mothers pulled their kids inside earlier. Jasmine didn't sleep. Well, every sound made her jump. She stopped sitting by the screen door, stopped folding church fans. Then one night, she heard Eula May whispering again. This time, Jasmine didn't fake sleep. She listened. Lord, I thank you for one more day. I thank you for the roof, for breath, for my babies, for Marcus, because he's still here. Jasmine blinked in the dark. She got up, tiptoed to the hallway, and leaned against the wall. And for the first time, she didn't feel annoyed, she didn't roll her eyes, she just listened. After the prayer she walked out and stood beside her grandmother, didn't say a word, just stood there. Eulaim smiled and squeezed her hand. You don't gotta understand it all, yet she said just don't. Let go when things get loud. That stuck. Years later, Jasmine would replay that night like a tape on loop. The fear, the yelling, the calm in her grandmother's voice, and that prayer. It didn't erase the noise, but it gave her something solid to stand on. Looking back, now Jasmine told the Dallas crowd, I think that was the moment I stopped looking for miracles and started paying attention to survival. Someone near the back whispered, yes, ma'am. She nodded gently. I was 11 years old, standing in a hallway that smelled like pine saw and heat, learning that faith doesn't always feel good, but it keeps you grounded when the world tries to knock you out. But as she got older, faith took on a different meaning, especially when she entered law school. Law school wasn't in the cards, at least not at first. Jasmine had planned to become a teacher, something stable, predictable, but life doesn't care about plans. A college professor, Dr. Hargrove, pulled her aside after a heated classroom debate and said, you don't argue to be heard, you argue to change minds. You ever think about law? She laughed. I'm broke, Dr. Hargrove. He looked her straight in the eye and said, then change what being broke means. And that was that. She applied to law school in Austin with a secondhand laptop and a bank account that barely stayed above zero. She got in, she packed a suitcase and 2 boxes and moved into a studio apartment that was barely bigger than Ulima's hallway. But Austin was different. It was fast, loud. Nobody knew her name. Nobody cared where she came from. Jasmine started to lose her footing that first year. Everyone else had prep classes under their belts, tutors, support systems. She had grit, and some nights even that felt thin. She sat in the back of the library most nights, headphones and head down, trying to make sense of cases that read like another language. And when she couldn't keep her eyes open anymore, she'd whisper Eula May's old prayer, Lord, give me strength. Don't need a miracle, just strength. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't grand, but it was honest. Then came the case that cracked her open. During her 3rd year, she took a clinic placement at a public defender's office. That's where she met Mateo Quinlan, 16, arrested for robbery, no weapon found. No record, no real evidence. He didn't speak much, just sat there across the table with tired eyes that looked too old for his face. Jasmine believed him when he said he didn't do it, but no one else did. The case dragged on. Jasmine worked late every night, digging through camera footage, witness statements, police reports that contradicted each other. The system didn't move for kids like Mateo. It barely crawled. She remembered the day she stood in front of the judge, hands shaking, trying not to let her voice crack as she said, Your Honor, there is no proof, there is no weapon, there is no justice in proceeding. The judge dismissed the case. Mateo walked free, but Jasmine didn't celebrate. She went home that night, collapsed on her mattress, and cried harder than she ever had in her life, not from relief, but from rage that she almost couldn't save him, rage that no one else had tried, rage that kids like Mateo were slipping through holes no one bothered to patch. She didn't pray that night. She sat in silence until the next morning when she walked into an old neighborhood church in East Austin, sat alone in the back row and stared at the stained glass. An older woman slid into the pew beside her, gently handed her a tissue, and said, You look like someone carrying a heavy bag. Jasmine managed a smile. I don't know if I believe anymore, she whispered. The woman didn't flinch. She leaned closer and said, Then rest. Faith ain't a sprint, it's something you walk with, even when your legs hurt. Jasmine didn't know that woman's name, never saw her again, but that one sentence lived in her bones. I didn't get into politics because I love power, Jasmine told the Dallas audience, her voice low. I got into it because I was tired of seeing boys like Mateo fall through the cracks. She paused, letting that sink in, and I knew I couldn't protect everybody, but I could try. A little boy in the front row looked up at her like she was made of stone and fire all at once. Jasmine caught his gaze and smiled. I believe in justice, she said, even when the world doesn't. She sat back, took a sip of water, and let the air settle. Faith, to me, became less about praying things away and more about having the strength to face them head on. But nothing tested her belief in people or in God like her first months in Congress. Washington wasn't what Jasmine expected. She knew politics would be dirty, but she hadn't anticipated the weight, the loneliness, the way it seeped into your bones. Her first month in Congress was like walking into a room where everyone already knew the dance and nobody cared to teach her the steps. She'd walk into meetings and feel the sideways glances, the polite smiles that didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. Some folks looked at her like she didn't belong. Others didn't even bother looking. There were moments she stood on the house floor, her mouth dry, thinking back to that hot little hallway in Texarkana, wondering how she got from there to this. And some nights when the lights were off and the city outside hummed in the distance, she sat in her apartment in silence, her phone screen lighting up with messages she didn't have the energy to answer. And then the threats started: emails, letters, even a voicemail from someone who called her a disgrace and said she should go back to where she came from. She never told her mama, never told Ula may why worry them, but it got to her, not all at once, not dramatically. It chipped away. One night after a brutal day of debates, Jasmine stayed late at the office. The building was nearly empty. Her heels were off, her hair was tied up. She had folders spread across the table like a battlefield, and she was just tired. She stared at a document she'd read 5 times, already trying not to cry, not because of the bill, but because everything felt heavy and useless. Her chest was tight, her jaw ached. She stood up, paced the room, whispered, "What am I even doing here?" That's when she noticed someone in the hallway, an older man in janitor blues, pushing a mop cart slowly past her door. He paused, looked, and gave a small smile. "You all right in there?" She forced a smile back. "Yeah, just trying to save the world one bill at a time." He chuckled and nodded. "Don't let the weight lie to you. You ain't alone in that room." He walked off. She sat back down, a little stunned by how those words landed, and when she gathered her things to leave, she noticed a sticky note on the edge of her desk. She hadn't seen it before. Written in neat handwriting were 6 words: "Even the strong get to rest." No signature, no name. She held that note in her hand for a long while, read it 3, 4, 5 times, then tucked it into her wallet. "It's still there." "That night," Jasmine said, scanning the crowd in loss, "was the first time since law school that I truly felt like I was about to break." She looked at Janelle again. "But faith isn't about being unshakable. Sometimes it's about admitting you're shaking and choosing to stay anyway." The audience was quiet now, not with tension, but attention. "I used to think believing in God meant always having the answer. Now I know it means being okay with not knowing. It means trusting the process, even when your hands are empty." A woman near the aisle let out a soft "Some days the noise of this world will drown you if you let it, but grace it whispers, quiet, gentle, just enough to keep you standing." She paused and reached for her water. "And let me tell you something," she added, "that whisper has saved me more times than applause ever could." The room took that in. A few heads bowed, a few arms crossed tighter around chests. So when that little girl asked her about God, she saw more than a child. She saw herself. Jasmine sat forward on the metal chair, elbows resting on her knees. The mic was still in her hand, but she wasn't speaking like a politician anymore. She wasn't delivering sound bites or searching for applause. She was just talking to a little girl who reminded her too much of her younger self. Janelle was still sitting in the 3rd row, legs swinging gently under her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap, eyes locked on Jasmine's. She hadn't said another word. She didn't have to. Jasmine cleared her throat. "You know," she said softly, "when I was your age, I didn't understand God. I thought he was a thing grown folks used to make sense of pain, and honestly, sometimes I still don't get it." She paused. "But I'll tell you what I do know." She shifted in her seat again. Her voice was steady but soft. "God to me is memory. He's the sound of my grandma humming while washing dishes. He's my mother counting coins at the grocery store and saying we'll make it work. He's the reason I didn't give up when everything told me to." Someone in the audience murmured, "Amen." "He's not loud. He doesn't always answer when you want him to, but he shows up in the moments that feel small, when a stranger tells you something you didn't know you needed to hear, when a note shows up on your desk and reminds you to breathe, when a little girl raises her hand and asks you something that cracks your whole heart open." She stopped and smiled at Janelle. "You did that," she said. "You asked something brave and honest, and you reminded me of why I started this journey in the first place." Her voice began to shake. "God means not being alone in the fight. God means even when the world feels too loud or too cruel, there's still something gentle holding you up, even if you can't see it, even if you don't always believe it." Her eyes glistened again. "I've lost people. I've failed. I've been embarrassed, angry. I've stood in front of cameras pretending I had it all together when I wanted to scream. And in those moments when everything else fell quiet, that's when I remembered my grandmother's hands, her voice, her faith. And somehow, I found mine again." Tears slipped down her cheek, and she didn't bother wiping them away. "I know this ain't the answer you were expecting, baby girl," she said, "but it's the truth. God is love when the world forgets. God is courage when you don't feel brave. And sometimes he's just the reason you keep putting one foot in front of the other." Janelle stood again. She didn't say a word, just walked toward Jasmine slowly, quietly, like she didn't want to disturb the moment. Jasmine opened her arms just like she had earlier. And this time she held the hug a little longer. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The room stayed still. Nobody coughed. Nobody shifted. It was as if everyone understood something sacred was happening, and they didn't dare break it. When Jasmine pulled back, she gently held Janelle's face and whispered, "You matter, okay? Don't forget that." The little girl smiled and nodded. Then she turned and walked back to her seat. Jasmine took one last breath into the mic. "Thank you all for listening. I didn't plan any of that. But sometimes the truth doesn't need a script." The audience clapped, but not like a rally. It wasn't loud or explosive. It was slow, respectful, like they were clapping for something they didn't want to end. Jasmine stood, gave a small wave, and stepped off the stage. And later that night, when she was back in her hotel room, peeling off her shoes and rubbing her swollen feet, she reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of paper. That same sticky note from the Capitol janitor months ago. She placed it on the nightstand next to her Bible. Even the strong get to rest. She finally did. If this story moved you in any way, share it, pass it on. And if you want to hear more real stories that leave something with you, hit that subscribe button. We'll be right here waiting. In life, especially when faced with hardship or doubt, remember that strength doesn't mean never shaking or never falling. True strength is about continuing to stand, even when you're scared or uncertain. Faith isn't always about having all the answers. It's about trusting the process and holding on, even when things feel impossible. When a young girl asked what God means, the answer was not just about religion or rules, but about connection, memory, resilience, and love. It's about the small moments that give us hope and courage to keep going. Sometimes, it's simply about knowing you're not alone in your struggles. If you're feeling overwhelmed, remember, even the strongest need rest. Give yourself grace. Reach out for support. Keep your heart open, and don't be afraid to be vulnerable. And finally, listen to others and to yourself with kindness and patience. You never know which simple question or moment will change everything.